If I've learned anything from buying a water purifier and never once changing the filter, it's that somehow I can't taste magnesium. If I've learned two things, it's that buying the pitcher isn't enough. And that's exactly what learning open chords on a guitar and never going beyond that is. It's you're buying the pitcher, never changing the filter. Incredible metaphor. I know. You can thank me later. So today what we're doing is we're going to take open chords and we're going to learn how to make them interesting by adding the notes around them in a very simple way that is actually going to make sense and not seem like just crazy music theory. All right? We're going to do this in the people's key, the key of G major. All right? So the bass chord for the entire lesson is just this guy right here. Middle finger 3rd fret on the low E string, pointer finger 2nd fret on the A string, ring finger 3rd fret on the B string. Everything we're going to do is going to be this voicing of a G major chord. You can add your pinky to kind of get that high G, 3 on the high E string, if you want. Most of what we're going to do is going to just be this voicing right here, okay? So, G major, aside from being a chord, is a key. Now, the chord of G major only has 3 different notes, G, B, and D. The key of G major has 7 notes. So we're going to learn how to add and incorporate all 7 of those notes and change this chord in a way that you're never going to forget, and it's going to make a lot of sense. All right? So we have this chord down. You probably already know a bunch of other chords in the key of G. Maybe the first ones you learn are like a C major, a D major, E minor, A minor, B minor. Now, it can be kind of daunting changing between all those and moving your hand around, right? So one really easy way that singer-songwriters get around this is just by kind of planting your ring finger right here and then changing the chords. Which is great, but I want to kind of take that one step further and just talk about the different places that you'll find those notes to kind of make your own chords and then find replacements for maybe chords that are more difficult for you right now to kind of get rid of this hard water sounding open chord thing and then add a little bit of ion exchange to get your alkaline levels up. The metaphor continues. All right, so we got this chord, G major. Now the notes I want to add are super simple. It's going to be open 2, 3 on the low E string, open 2, 3 on the A string, open 2 on the D string, okay? This is really great because you can practice this just using your pointer finger and your middle finger like this. Open 2, 3, open 2, 3, open 2. The names of these notes are E, F sharp, G, A, B, C, D, and E. Now you might see this as the E minor scale, which is totally true, but we're doing this over a G chord. So these are the same notes in the G major scale, but now we're gonna add it to this chord, okay? So at the very base of what we're talking about here, you can plant your ring finger just where it is, and then play through that scale, and then just kind of strum the rest of the open chords just to kind of give you the sound of in scale form. Now, this sounds pretty good. It doesn't necessarily sound super useful in a way that we can make into kind of like a singer-songwriter thing yet, but we're getting there, okay? So I want to start on just the root note of this G major chord, G note, right? Where your middle finger is. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to start hitting a different root note with a pick or with your finger, however you want to do this, and try to strike just a single note from this little scale that we just learned, and then continue on and strum the chord. In fact, at the very basic of what we can do with this is we can just take a G chord, and I'm just striking the root note, and then I'm going down and up on the higher part of the string. So I'm aiming for maybe starting at the D string, and then just trying to go down and up there. It doesn't really matter as long as you try to separate the sound of the root note from the rest of the chord, okay? So don't worry about getting stuck up on hitting specific strings aside from the root note. It'll just give you that kind of chord sound. So if we go root, down, up, root, down, we can maybe just turn this into an exercise where we go one note further in the scale. The next thing would be just open A. Then to B, which is 2 on the A string. Then to the 3rd fret on the A string. Okay, so already it's starting to sound a little more musical because we're playing what is essentially that G major chord, the higher end of it, over a different bass note, or root note, however you want to look at it, okay? Now, eventually we can start to do this and then add maybe like fuller versions of chords. Like again, one of the most popular things that you'll see in a lot of songs is just keeping your ring finger there, going from a G chord straight down a string, to a C major chord. Technically, this is a C add 9 chord. I don't want to get caught up so much on the names of the chords. Other than that, it's a type of C major chord. All right, G to C. So you'll see that these notes come from here, because when you move this straight down a string, you'll see that the notes that we're holding down with our pointer finger and our middle finger are the exact same notes that we played in that little scale, right? Now you can get creative and just start really making an imprint of your mind of, all right, E, A, D strings, open 2, 3, open 2, 3, open 2, doing it over this, and then eventually be able to do this to make all the chords in that key, all right? So there are 6 main chords in the key of G, like we talked about at the very beginning: G major, A minor, B minor, C major, D major, and E minor, right? Playing it like that is great practice. It's a great way to start getting these different forms into your hand, but it can also kind of be daunting when you're starting out to kind of change that quickly, right? So what we can do is we can just take the essence of that bass note, of the root note, and then play it over your ring finger just being there, and then kind of start to play these representations of chords with it, all right? And then we're going to use the same thing to kind of make some fancy, interesting stuff out of one chord. But what we can do, like let's say we have like a G, C, B minor, E minor progression. Usually you'd be like, okay, if you maybe see a tab chart, you'd be like, all right, G, C, B minor, E minor, which again, you know, is not super uncommon, but it's not the easiest thing to be able to do that and to make those changes quick. Especially that C to that B minor, that's like a super quick change. So what we can do is maybe if we start with like a G to this C, like that, right? It's the exact same thing conceptually as far as like the chord progression goes. We have the G major, C, we just kind of hit that root note C, C add 9. You can really play a B minor version of a B minor just by striking the B, the second fret on the A string, and then getting the rest of the chord like that. Again, a lot of times, if you like really just plug the notes of that into like a chord finder generator, you'll see this is just a G major chord, the same notes that make up for it. But because we're heavy on this B note, it's kind of taking the place of a B minor. If you want to go one step further, you could add your middle finger to the second fret on the G string right there. I think that's kind of like a more useful way to maybe play like something like a replacement for a B minor chord in case you're trying to get here, right? I think this one sounds pretty good, right? So G, C, B, and then E minor, which again, E minor is pretty easy. In fact, this progression and strumming pattern might sound kind of familiar no matter how you slice it up. There's always that underlying subtext. There's always some kind of calcium in the water that'll remind you of a popular song, right? But what we're doing here is we're just kind of taking that, just trying to strike that root note, that B, and then adding the E minor here, okay? And now again, we could go all in and be like, all right, this is a G major to a C add 9, to a different version of a G to an E minor 7. But I think the interesting thing here is really just kind of trying to focus on finding the notes in the scale and then kind of adding the chord on top of it. And that'll bring us to the next thing that we can do, is we can kind of just play along within a chord using these same notes, right? So let's take the C chord in this kind of progression. Well, let's just play on the C chord, but think of these surrounding notes as something we can add to a C chord, right? So maybe the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna strike that bass note. I'm kind of heavy on that C. And then I'm kind of walking back through the scale. So what I'm doing here is I'm hitting the A string, and then I'm strumming the rest of the chord. Maybe I'll go down a note in that scale, right? From a C to a B, third fret on the A string to the second fret on the A string. I can open it up and then end up on G. So instead of just going like a C chord to a G chord, I can play around a little bit. kind of moving a chord direction in a certain way. We're kind of taking these chords, taking the progression, and using the root notes to drive it in a certain direction, right? Let's say I want to go from this C major chord all the way to E minor. All right, something really simple you'll see in a lot of songs. Instead of just going, all right, C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, E minor. Maybe we want to kind of add a little bit of action to it. Again, there's a time and a place. Sometimes you want it to keep it simpler. But just having the ability to take this C and drive it all the way back to E, right? What we're going to do is we're going to go backwards through the scale, 3-2 open A string, 3-2 open E string. Okay, so this is just little things that you can do that you're going to see in a lot of really common chord progressions, and being able to kind of diagnose where these scales, I guess, exist in between them, and then how to really kind of strike a bass note and then add the chord on top of it. Now, you can even play a different chord. Like, let's go to a higher voice, the regular, the classic D major voicing right here. Middle finger 2 on the high E string, ring finger 3 on the B string, pointer finger 2 on the G string, right? We can kind of take a lot of this and still incorporate these. One thing that you can do is your middle finger right here, you can leave the E string and kind of grab a C bass note. I think that's like a really cool sound. All I'm doing is I'm playing one chord and I'm changing the bass note around. And you'll notice that a lot of riffs do this, where you kind of take like a home bass, and in this particular spot we're using the D major chord as the home bass, and then kind of using other notes that we know are in a key that it exists in to kind of add a little bit of action where, you know, one thing is staying the same and then other things are changing. And that's like a really cool thing to do that I think always sounds good. Like you can do the same thing with maybe 2 other chords in the key of G. E minor to A minor, right? At the very least, you can use some of these notes to transition, like we talked about. One of the most common ones is going between A minor and E, grabbing that G along the way. E. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff that you can do to make it sound really a lot more interesting, right? And it all comes down to just learning the simplest scale shape in the simplest spot. All this stuff is movable with the capo, you know, if you want to play, you know, because everything we've done in the key is in the key of G conceptually. Like if you have a capo, and then let's go super common, capo 3rd fret, right? Every Tumblr high school girl's guitar is what we're doing now. So 3 frets higher, use the same shapes. All right, so what's 3 frets higher than G? We have G, G sharp, A sharp, or B flat. We can play in the key of B flat by doing the same things. So all this stuff is movable with the capo, etc., etc. So anyways, something I thought was kind of helpful. A lot of my favorite guitar players use different bass notes through a scale to transition. It really gets cool when you kind of think of bass notes out of a scale too, which I might do another lesson on more complicated stuff later if you guys are interested in that kind of thing. But again, something that I use in my own playing that I've stolen from a lot of great players that I really admire. Elliott Smith being one of them, and he's a master at that. And a lot of great players are. If you have any questions or comments, hit me up in the comment section, Instagram, Twitter, or the website. I'll talk to you all soon. Thanks a lot.